Hi, Steve. Thank you for agreeing to be interviewed and welcome. So, this is Steve Webster, and Steve has been a friend of World Prayer Centre for many years. And Steve, you work for International Justice Mission. Can you let us know what you do there?
Yeah, well, it's great to be able to join you, Natasha. It's a while since we saw each other. In fact, the conference just before lockdown. Um, I work for International Justice Mission, or let's call it IJM because it's a lot easier that way.
Yeah.
IJM's the largest anti-slavery organisation in the world, but we also focus on other forms of violence, particularly violence against women and children and police abuse of power. And I joined IJM over 8 years ago after a 33-year career in a bank. It's quite a shift as their operations director, but last year stood down to go part-time. And I now have the incredible privilege of being their prayer and spiritual formation director for the UK. And that really focuses on 3 areas. The first one is building out a move of prayer to end slavery and injustice that we believe God has called for. Secondly, to oversee the spiritual rhythms of IJM. Everything that we do at IJM is underpinned in prayer. Keeping that fresh, looking at some chaplaincy work with our staff. And the third element has actually been quite influenced by World Prayer Centre. So I have the privilege of 1 day a month spending with God in a sort of watchman gatekeeper type role as well.
Fantastic. So, Steve, what are the changes that you guys have seen in terms of IJM's work since the coronavirus outbreak?
Yeah, well, I think it's probably important to say at the outset that the evil of slavery and violence against those living in poverty hasn't gone away during lockdown. It might be less visible because the focus inevitably has been on the COVID disease. But in fact, what we've been seeing on the ground is that violence in many cases is increasing. So the lockdown laws that we've seen worldwide are inadvertently creating the conditions for disturbing increases in abuse in many of the areas that we work in. So, for many, staying at home or where they live is necessary to tackle this virus. But for many, it's actually the least safe place for them to be. So children and women around the world are more vulnerable than ever to domestic violence, including sexual violence. And just to give you one simple example, in Uganda, for the past 3 years, the Ugandan Child Helpline received an average of 248 calls a month. In May, when lockdown began, they received 881 calls. And on the 10th of April, they received 700 calls alone in 1 day. And we're seeing that sort of thing replicated. Another example would be Kenya, where we've seen a spike in police abuse whilst enforcing the night curfew. And the Kenyan government's Independent Police Oversight Authority has reported and documented at least 35 cases of police brutality in connection with the curfew, which included 12 resulting in death. So we're seeing this increase in violence. And I think also we're seeing that lockdown has left some survivors even more vulnerable to re-trafficking or re-victimization. So, the closure of businesses has meant survivors have lost jobs and clients and now have no income. And in the countries that they're living in, that makes them incredibly vulnerable to re-trafficking. And we're also seeing a huge issue, particularly in South and Southeast Asia, of millions of migrant workers seeking to return home. Many have no money at all to travel. Social distancing isn't possible. And a lot of them are having to walk huge distances to try and get home, often across borders. And that makes them incredibly open to
Mm.
traffickers and criminals, as well as susceptible to malnutrition. So we're seeing this increase in violence during this time. But at the same time, we're also seeing God's people respond in remarkably generous and brave ways. And in a sense, really fulfilling Jesus' call to love your neighbor. So as you can imagine, our teams are receiving many urgent requests for help from survivors' families whose livelihoods have been put at risk. To give you an example, in terms of how we are responding to that, in Ghana, our team have literally been loading trucks and delivering essential supplies to survivor families and partner care homes to support rescued children and families. They're also delivering PPE to aftercare partners, including shelters and also staff from the Department of Social Welfare. Similarly, we saw the other week our team in Romania delivering food and PPE to shelter partners so that we could help the survivors there. The incredible thing is, we're also seeing survivors themselves mobilizing to educate and support other survivors. And I think this really shows the amazing transformation that God has brought about in their lives. So we've been massively encouraged to see leaders of the Released Bonded Labourers Association in South Asia visiting survivor communities and raising awareness of COVID and how those communities can protect themselves from catching it, but also from spreading it. And those groups of survivors have also distributed over 1,600 relief kits for other survivors. So we're seeing this incredible, I think, God-driven move of survivors helping other survivors, which is absolutely amazing. We're also seeing God releasing just incredible creativity and favor amongst his people.
Mm.
And I guess like most charities, we're adapting to this new digital age, with many of our major fundraising and prayer events being cancelled and having to be moved online and do things in new and creative ways. And I think we've seen technology and social media being used for good in ways that we couldn't have imagined a few months ago.
Yeah.
I think I mentioned at the beginning that IJM is completely sustained in and driven by prayer. And I think like many reports that we're hearing, we've been seeing a real growth in prayer, but in new and connected ways. Just a few weeks ago, our team in Ghana held a prayer gathering that we were part of, joined by supporters and churches, but from all over the world. And I think Lawrence actually attended that event. And it was just an incredibly powerful time of prayer. And we're seeing that replicated in other parts of the world. From an IJM staff perspective, a few weeks ago, I and some other IJM leaders around the world felt this real call from God to stop and to pray, literally to stop and pray. So last Thursday, Friday, we had a wave of prayer that moved around the globe. So it started at 12 noon in Washington, D.C., and then moved west across all the different prayer zones, finishing in Ghana at around 12:30 their time on Friday. So it was just amazing. We had over 630 staff praying in 13 different time zones, 310 hours of focused prayer in 9 languages, just amazing presence of God. So we're seeing this real lean into prayer at the moment.
Yeah.
And incredibly, even in situations of lockdown, we're seeing God answering those prayers and providing ways for us to continue to bring freedom. So just recently, about a week ago, IGEM Philippines were able to support the local police in rescuing 3 children from online sexual exploitation in Manila and to arrest the perpetrator.
Mm.
So despite the constraints, we're finding ways of being able to support the local authorities and still bring rescue. So I'd say, in the midst of this global crisis, we're actually seeing God's people rising up again in prayer and in action to bring justice and hope to what is a really hurting world.
Fantastic. So, Steve, is there any specific nation that you think we need to pray for right now, or how should we be praying?
Well, that's a big question, and we
Yeah.
could spend all day on that. I guess, I guess a bit like Ian, there are so many countries around the world we could pray for, but I'd like to really ask you to pray for the Philippines. So the Philippines, we're working on tackling an explosion in online sexual exploitation of children, or OSEC as we call it. And OSEC sees real children sexually abused in real time for predators to watch online. And the Philippines is the global hotspot. We believe it's a massive hidden global problem, but the Philippines seems to be the hotspot at the moment. But the demand is fueled, paid for, and viewed by Western sex offenders, including here in the UK. The average age of victims that we've seen on the operations we've run is just 11 years old. But the youngest rescued was just 3 months old at the time of rescue.
Gosh.
And we're seeing the majority of the facilitators of this abuse in the Philippines are actually parents and close family members. So the children are currently in lockdown, often with their abusers.
Yeah.
But as I say, the demand is coming from foreign customers, including Brits. So at the moment, in lockdown, those sex offenders have more time and are more ready as they search for entertainment to commission this sort of abuse. So we believe that we're probably seeing a significant increase in that type of abuse at the moment.
Mm.
So we've been working closely with the Philippine government and police and law enforcement agencies. We desperately need God's intervention. So I'd love you to pray for 3 things for the Philippines.
Yeah.
Firstly, to pray for the Philippine authorities, IGEM and our partner agencies, that the resources for this work would be made available, and for God to help us to identify, rescue and restore even more victims. Secondly, I'd like us to pray, and this is difficult, but I'd like us to pray for the sex offenders, particularly here in the UK, but in other Western countries as well, because they're the ones creating the demand for this abuse. I'd like us to pray that God would change their hearts and their minds, that they would come to know the saving grace of our Lord and his mercy and would repent and stop this activity. And thirdly, this month we're launching a report in conjunction with multiple partners focused on OSEC in the Philippines. And that includes recommendations for government, for industry, and for civil society. So I'd love prayer that this would be a real catalyst for action, that we get positive media coverage, and it would result in collaboration and innovation between all parts of society around the world. This is a really complex issue, it's a technical issue, and it demands and requires lots of different groups to engage and to collaborate and to innovate. If we could pray for those, so that we could see breakthrough in this awful issue in the Philippines, that would be amazing.
Fantastic. That's great. Thank you so much, Steve. That's been really informative, and hopefully it will really help to inform some of our intercessors' prayers. And yeah, please let us know, any breakthroughs that you have. And yeah, obviously it's an issue that that desperately needs prayer. So thank you for your time, and yeah, we just bless all the guys there at IJM and all the work that you do. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Natasha, and thank you for the opportunity to share, and thank you also for the support from World Prayer Centre over the years, and the intercessors that we engage with through you. It's been an amazing journey, and so much more that God has in store for us, I think.
Yeah, and if people want to find out more about IJM, what's the website for them to go to?
Yeah, go to our website, ijmuk.org, and you'll see there there'll be a focus this month on OSEC, but you'll also see our Unsafe in Lockdown campaign, which is focusing on these issues of increased violence during this time of lockdown.
Fantastic. Okay, thanks, Steve. Take care.
Thank you. Bless you.